Hello everybody, this is Right This Way part 3, and today I thought it would be helpful perhaps to cover some of the very basics of plotting. Yesterday we looked at character, and the first episode we looked at where to get your ideas from. So I'm putting together the very basic moves that you'll need to write that essay, not that essay, that novel that you had in mind with all this time spent at home. So plots. Now, I think the way to understand plot is to think about it as the backbone around which your story is constructed. And when you think of it like that, you need to make it stand up straight. And carrying on this metaphor, you can think of issues like style and pacing as like the muscles that give it the tone that you need. But we're looking today just at that basic backbone running through your story. And this is going to be a really, really basic class because, of course, plots can be very complicated and convoluted. I'm just talking about the simplest level that I can think of. So when you come to writing, you might be sitting there thinking, well, I've got my idea, I've got a good character. How much planning on the plot do I need to make this baby go? I think that will be down to personal taste. I tend to think of my planning more like stepping stones, that I'm crossing a river and the first one I'm standing on is my idea and I can see where I'm going. So the last stepping stone is in place, which is the conclusion. I think it's very important to have a sense of your ending before you start writing. Others may disagree, but I think it helps. And then when I sort of thinking about starting writing, I then put maybe 3 or 4 other stepping stones in the river to step on. And I always make sure that I have at least 1 or 2 stepping stones ahead of me that I haven't yet written. The reason is otherwise you get to the last stepping stone, you're standing in the middle of the river, you can see you're ending over there, but there's no way you can make that jump. And that's when you lose energy and you give up on the book and, you know, all that disaster happens, you get wet. Anyway, so that would be my advice. But you might be a more methodical, planning orientated person, so you'd want to do every single stepping stone. But that's absolutely fine. It's, you know, each to their own. Anyway, so here we go with the basics plus a task at the end, all in my 10 minutes I'm going to spend with you. So how to think about a very basic plot. Now, if I showed you this, and I showed you this, let's see if I can move it in the right way, there we go. You'd be thinking, what do they have in common as plots? Well, Charles Dickens' Great Expectations is, I think, well, it's my favourite Dickens novel, and it has a fantastic plot involving escaped convicts and misty riverscapes and mysterious benefactor, all sorts of great stuff in there. And then we've got the Shrek series, which in its own way is a masterpiece, probably written by committee in the way these things get done, but continues every episode, continues to be amusing and clever. They have great characters. Both of these have great characters, but they also have excellent plots. And I think you could actually say, in many ways, they have the same plot moves. Bear with me. So on the wall of Pixar is a series of writing tips. I've got a copy of it, which I often take to show children in writing workshops or with adults. And one of those writing tips is about plot, and it gives you an idea of the basic plot of any Pixar film. And here it is. There are 5 steps to this plot. So are you ready? Number 1 is basically every day our character does such and such. Okay. Number 2 is one day something happens. This is the call to adventure, the change. Number 3 is, as a consequence of that, or because of that, something happened. Number 4 is, and because of that, which also coincides often with the twist, which makes the plot unexpected or more interesting. And number 5 is, of course, and finally, everything happened. So let's apply this to Shrek the Third. Now, so the everyday start of this book is Shrek and Fiona have to be king and queen, and Shrek really isn't enjoying it. And one day he realizes there is another possible person to become king. And because of that, he leaves the kingdom and goes in search of, I think it's Arthur, isn't it? And whilst he's away, I think it's Prince Charming comes and takes over. Anyway, you might know the plot better than me, but I remember that he comes back to find everyone's turned against him. And because of that, they have to fight their way back in. And there's a twist there. I don't want to spoil the film. Watch it, you'll see there's a because of that. And finally, well, it's a Pixar movie, so they all lived happily ever after. So 5 basic steps. There's loads more going on in the film, but you can see the backbone running down this film that gives you a sense of its structure. Okay, let's have a go at Charles Dickens. Now, this might be a bit ambitious. I think there is basically 5 steps here. So the everyday is Pip living as a blacksmith's son in the Kentish marshes. And one day he discovers, or he's told, that he has been given an inheritance by a mysterious benefactor. Because of that, he moves to London and starts living the life of the prodigal son. Because of that, and again, this is another plot spoiler, it's often this step which is like the most key moment. He realizes there's somebody comes back into his life. I'm not going to spoil it for you for those who haven't read it yet. Somebody comes back into his life and he realizes that his prodigal son life, living on all those riches, has dubious origins. And because of that, he renounces that way of life and has to find a new way forward. And that leads to the and finally. It's an interesting book because it's got this sort of bittersweet, famously ambiguous ending. Do read it if you've not got round to it, and this is time to get your teeth into some classics. So, do I do that in my own books? Well, I don't plot like this because, as I've said, I tend to plot with just a few steps. But I do find, looking backwards, I have done this anyway. So here's a recent novel. It's called The Curious Crime. It's written by me as Julia Golding. It's set in a fantasy natural history museum, a massive mysterious building, and because of that works for this one too. So every day my main character, is unable to get an education because she's female in a world which chooses not to educate women, and so she's left cleaning the museum. One day, where is he? I'm moving my finger the right way. Henry, who's a scholar who's also experiencing prejudice because he's from Africa. And when they meet, there's a murder takes place in the museum and they have to investigate it. That's the next because. They have to investigate it to clear their names. And because of that, they find out what's really going on in the mysterious parts of the museum. And finally, well, it's a murder mystery and the murder is solved. So that's one of the and finalies, but there's some other and finalies. So it does have a basic backbone of these steps. So there you go. So now you need to know what your homework is. So your homework is to go to your shelf and pull off a book that you know well. It could be a film maybe, and see if that structure fits. So let's go through that again. That's the everyday start. Every day. My character does such and such. One day, something happens. In Harry Potter, that's the letter arrives from Hogwarts. Because of that, something happens. Because of that, that's the big reversal or the big twist, or there's a sort of unwinding of the plot. And finally, however the book ends. And once you've had a go at looking at stories in that way, why don't you sit down and work with whatever idea you've got in your head at the moment and see if you can fill out that skeleton. And who knows, you might find this is the first step to actually going on with that plot. So that's all for this week. I'm going to start these broadcasts again on Monday. So it will be 5 a week as long as this self-isolation happens. Please do contact me if you've got any follow-up questions or you've got ideas of topics you'd like me to cover. Otherwise, I'll be back here at 2 p.m. GMT on Monday. Thank you very much.